Hello, I've just read chapter 12 of The Last of the Jedi, Underworld. Now this is quite a short chapter, but we do pick up right where we left off. And we got Trevor trying to talk to Ferris about how he knows how to find Solace. And he says when he was attacked by the slug, and I'm just going to read out the little interaction the two have. It was when the slug started to pull me down. Trevor, I'm sorry, Enough with the guilt 101. I'm trying to tell you something. And that line really made me laugh, Ferry One. But he explains that when he dropped down the Alpha charge, he didn't just see the slug glow. He didn't just see the light didn't just reveal the slug. It also revealed a glint. He couldn't quite tell whether it was water or metal. But then he said that, remember that some of the rumours said it was below, that Solace was below the crust. And Ferris immediately jumped into action. And he had he didn't have to question Trevor. He just trusted Trevor's perceptions, and he woke up, and Ferris woke up the others, and they all went to the spot Trevor had been at, where he got stuck. And Ferris shines a glow rod down there and sees a glint. I'm fairly sure he definitely sees something, and he can't quite tell what it is, but he says he'll make his way down there and he'll call up if everything's good. And everyone who's a bit tired and sleepy, including Keats just leans on the side of a column and just says, "Take your time." And we also learn that they're doing this at empty hours, which is pretty much when no one in the Underworld, as we'll call it, at the bottom level on the crust, pretty much when no one is awake. Not even the ones who are awake before dawn. It's too early for them, and it's too late for people who are out even after, who stay up even. It's too late for people who even stay up very, very late. Anyway, Ferris Mate climbs his way down, and as he climbs down, he sees that it's a tunnel. With gigantic stone blocks, and he sees engravings made by the slugs, and that's when he sees the machinery. And he also sees Trevor coming down with him, and he just says, what does he say to Trev? He just says to him to stay up there, and Trevor just goes, "No way, I found this place, I'm coming." And Ferris just knows it's a waste of breath to argue with Trevor, and just lets him come down with him, and they land, and that's when Ferris sees the machinery, and then he calls up to everyone that it's safe to come down. And as Hume's coming down, as he's climbing down the wall, from the engravings from the Ajuracrete slugs, as they made quite good toe and hand holds, but as he's coming down, he tries to avoid a yellow pool, and that's steaming and has a foul smell. And he says, "Be careful, it looks like there's some toxic waste down here." And Raya, I'm just going to call her Raya, or Tulum, I could just call her by her last name, Tulum, Raya observes that the systems, that this must have been quite primitive, because they use rails for transport here. And Keats looks up and says that there are conduit lines in the ceiling, and he wonders where they lead. And Hume says it doesn't look like Solace, but it could lead them there, and that's when Ferris hears a whisper above, and he can't even react by the time a shadowy figure hops down, and they're short with compact muscles, and they're wearing a close-fitting helmet, and around his waist is a tightly fitting belt that held a variety of weapons, and he didn't assume, and he didn't make a threatening stance. He just stood there in a casual way, and everyone kind of draws their blasters and their weapons, and Gilly and Spence get behind him while the other two, where everyone else starts to get closer to him, and he just goes, "You mentioned Solace?" And Ferris says, "Yes," and they want to go, and he just says, "We want to go there." And he says that he can take them there, but it will cost them. And Trevor asks why they should trust him, and he just explains that because their choices are limited here at the coast, and they either try to find it themselves or use them. And Keats asks how they know he can find it, and he says that because he's the only one that's gone there and been back. And that's consistent with a lot of the rumours that everyone else that they had all heard. They never heard of anyone they heard of people going to Solace, but they never heard of people coming back from Solace. And Ferris just says, "You got to do better than that." And he just the creature tells him that what many don't know is that long ago, even before Coruscant was covered in cities, it had vast oceans, and that these oceans were drained and pumped into caverns beneath the crust, and that's where they should go to find Solace. And everyone exchanges glances, and it sounded real, and to them it sounds real. It makes sense. And why would the Empire even go there? Because that would be a hard place for them to try and find it. And Ferris asks what his name is, and the creature just says that he wiped his identity and his past, just like them, because they're the erased. And he says to just call him Guide. And Ferris is a bit suspicious of Guide. He finds him a bit of an odd fellow. But then he thinks, but then he also thinks that everyone here is also kind of a bit odd, and he does think that, Guide is right, they didn't have much choice, and really it's the only lead that they found, and he says for Guide to take them there, and that's where we end off the chapter. Again, not really a whole lot to talk about. This is just a lot of moving the chapter. I'm moving the story. So there's not really a whole lot to talk about. I think Guide's quite mysterious. I'm going to be interested to see how he turns out. It would be funny if he. It would be funny if he just. Imagine if it winds up being Salacious B. Crumb. No. That wouldn't happen. But it would be interesting to see who Guide is, or what Guide turns out to be if Casey he's something else. Because Ferris has that suspicion. Okay, I found that interaction between Trevor and Ferris at the beginning quite funny. How he just calls him Ferry One, and he just says, "Stop with the wallowing guilt, Ferry One." I found that ever so funny. And of course, Trevor, he's as stubborn as ever. The thing is, I think Trevor is often quite funny without trying to be funny. And whereas Ferris, he's funny usually intentionally. There's not a lot of times where he's unintentionally funny. I think really the only example I can think of where he's unintentionally funny was earlier in the book, where he throws an Imperial officer out of speeder and says, "I need a ride." I think that was what, chapter 7 or so, chapter 7, chapter 8. So yeah, maybe chapter 6, but. Yeah, I'm going to be interested to see. We're on I'm on to next chapter's chapter 12, and it's what, 17 chapters is there? I'm going to have to quickly check. Chapter 17. Yeah, 17 chapters. We're on chapter 11 now, and now we're on page 101 out of how many pages? 137. So I'm going to be very interested to see just how we fit all of this into one book, because again I had a little bit of a peek on Wikipedia before I read the book and accidentally learned that that Ferrus winds up captured by Malorum in the book. So they've got to find. So there's a lot that they've got to do. You know, they've got to find Solace. They've got to get back up to the surface. They've got to invade the temple for Ferrus and Trevor. You know, they got to invade the temple for Obi-Wan because they need to find out what Malorum's next move is. And they need to get into his office for that. And again, I know Ferrus has to be captured by Malorum, and I'm fairly sure he doesn't escape until the next book. I could be wrong on that, but I'm fairly sure that's the case. So, you know, we've got a lot. Oh, we also got to find Phytor Rana as well, who's going to be in Solace. So, you know, we've got a lot to do in about 6 chapters. And that's what, and only in 37 pages. You know, 6 chapters, you know, that sounds like a lot. But we got 37 pages, you know. So pretty much all chapters from now on are going to be about 5 pages or so long, you know. So they're not very long chapters. We haven't got a lot of, and we've got a lot to come. So yeah, I'm going to be very interested to see how this progresses. Oh wow, I didn't notice that. I'm just looking at the cover right now. It's the original cover for the book. And I'm just noticing you've got the Jedi Temple there in the background. I never noticed that. Anyway. But yeah, I enjoy this chapter. I'm going to be interested to see how they fit everything in one go. I did accidentally find... I did add a little peek on Keats Freely's Wikipedia page, because I was just interested to see if this was his first appearance in Star Wars. It is. Because the way they talk about him, you know, it seems like he's another legacy character that they have in there. Because, you know, we've had Phytor, who was mentioned in Jedi Quest, we've had Dexter Jetster, we've had Obi-Wan, we've had Boba Fett, we've had Han, you know, we've had loads of legacy characters, and I'm interested as to, well, I was interested as to whether Keats was another one of them. And when I say legacy, I mean characters that have appeared before, just so we're clear. But no, Keats is a new character for this, and I was a bit disappointed to learn that he actually has an illustration along with Kuan, Orion and Dexter. And he looks nothing like how I imagined him. You know, I imagined him as a bald white man with a long black coat with a black shirt and trousers. And instead, he's a bit of a skeletal man with a brown coat and a shirt and a brown shirt and kind of beigey trousers, and he wears a kind of brown, kind of like detective sort of hat. So he also wears a tie. So He looks nothing like how I imagined him. But I am probably just gonna at least try to continue imagining him how I imagined him. So, yeah. I did look at some of the other pages as well to see if any of the other arrays had images. I did get a bit spoiled that Rahaya dies. I think Gillian Spence dies as well. I'm fairly sure Hume also dies. But I could be wrong on Hume. But yeah. Anyway, I'm going to be interested to see how this progresses, especially with how little time they have. Because again, we've only got 37 pages now. We've only got 37 pages. That would only be about, what, 3-4 chapters? We got 6 chapters. 6 chapters is a lot, and we don't have a lot of pages, so, yeah. Anyway, that's my review for chapter 11, and I'll see you all next time. Bye! Hello everyone, so I've just read chapter 12 of The Last of the Jedi Underworld. This is probably the shortest chapter in the book yet, not even doing about 3 pages. It doesn't even finish the 3rd page. So, you know, this is definitely the shortest chapter so far. It almost finishes it, but it doesn't. So, everyone's walking through this is going to be a very quick review. So, everyone's walking through the tunnel. And eventually... Let me see if I can find anything that may make this review a little bit more interesting and of note. That's so. We start off with them walking through the tunnel, and Guide says, "Watch out for the Juraqueet slugs as they're quite aggressive," and Trevor just says, "I think we've already been introduced." And they walk through, and the walls are dripping moisture, and they come across, and they will occasionally cross a foul-smelling, toxic pool of toxic waste. And Guide explains that the original cities of Coruscant were built on the crust centuries ago, and that much of the infrastructure is underground, and that most of the water and power tunnels have caved in. But there were some transport systems that relied on what he refers to as a primitive engine that connected to a track in the ground, which we would know as a train. But and he goes on to say that the tunnels they're walking through now were built out of blocks of stone, which, yeah, we know that. I'm fairly sure everyone there knows that. And he says that some of the tunnels are still intact, and they were later used to pump the oceans into the caverns, and that's where they're going. And they continue walking through, and they pretty much just lose track of time. They walk for so long, they don't know where they are, and they don't know what time of day it is. Ferris is just starting to feel the lack of sleep and decent food, but he keeps on going, and eventually he starts to hear water, and the Guide explains that they'll be coming up to the water, and it will go deeper, and they'll come up to some catwalks that will let them continue to go above the water, and eventually they get there. They splash through the water for a bit, and then they start going upstairs and platforms, and they see a sea creature below, and that's when Guide finally tells them, "Oh yeah, don't fall in." And I think we can gather that. And eventually they come to the top. They come to the top of the stairs, and the scaffolding suddenly opens up into a wide space, which runs the width of the cavern. And there are planks of plastoid and woods that are laid in patterns, and there are structures built there, and Guide holds up an electronic device, and it kind of makes a noise, and that makes an electronic noise, and everyone comes out. And that's when Guide says to everyone starts murmuring to them, and the erased Ferris and Trevor start to feel a bit uneasy. And Guide says that he says, "I brought them to you from above." And he turns around and merges with the crowd and says, "They are yours now." And the crowd begins to move in closer. Ferris, Trevor and the erased start to back up to the edge of the catwalk. And they have literally nowhere to go aside from the railings. And so, this is quite an ominous ending. But I don't think it's going to turn out to be what it seems like it's going to be. I have a feeling next chapter will open up, and what it turns out to be is just that we have someone say, "Would you like some food?" or something like that. And it turns out, oh no, this was just a cliffhanger to make it seem tense. I have a feeling that's what it's going to be, but you never know. Again, not really a whole lot to talk about. Not a whole lot at all, because this is such a short chapter and most of it is literally just walking. So, yeah. And that's my review for chapter 12. I'll get to reading chapter 13. Thank you all for watching, and goodbye. Hello, I've just read chapter 13 of The Master of the Jedi, Underworld. So, we pick up where we last left off. Ferris, Trevor and the erased are getting surrounded. They're surrounded, everyone's moving in on them. The erased ready their weapons. Trevor reaches into his utility belt, reaching for a grenade. And Ferris takes out his lightsaber. Let me go back a little bit. There we go. And Ferris is thinking that, well, he kind of expected Guide to betray them, but he didn't. But then that's when they all hear the people that they're surrounding them say, "Solace takes care of us," a woman said. "Solace brings us what we need," someone called. And that's when Ferris realises they're talking about Guide, and that Guide is Solace. And if you remember, I said it would be nice if Solace isn't a place, but a person. So I was right on that. And that's when Ferris realises this is how they survived. They Guides would bring people to them, and they would steal credits and items of value to buy supplies, and that they were scavengers. And again, the erased ready their weapons, and Ferris reaches into his belt for a grenade, and Ferris, of course, raises his lightsaber, and that's when Trevor throws a smoke grenade. As the first line of settlers charge. And at the same moment, Ferris draws his lightsaber, about to deflect incoming blast bolts. But that's when Guide somersaults over and tells everyone to halt for a moment. And she holds up and she goes, "Wait!" and looks over at Ferris and goes, "Jedi," as he moves his glow rod around Ferris's face, he goes, "Not quite." And Ferris just goes, "What do you mean, not quite?" And Ferris was thinking it wasn't supposed to be in a conversation, but it's good. He can look around. He can see what openings they have, avenues of escape, and individuals that looks more competent than others, and what hidden weapons they may have. And Solace just says, you should have done that already, not quite a Jedi. And referring to taking out his lightsaber, and says that you should have done it the first moment you arrived. And Ferris just goes, are you giving me lessons? And Solace says, obviously, you need them, Padawan. And that's when Ferris thinks, well, admittedly, his instincts do seem to fail him at the worst of times. And that's when he understands who Guide is. And he should have guessed all along, and it seems so obvious now. But Guide is Vitor Anna. And the thing is, even Wikipedia has a separate page for Vitor Anna called Guide. So I'm going to have to pop something on the talk page there. And it does quite literally refer to an individual called Guide in Last of the Jedi, so I'm going to have to pop something on the talk page there. But anyway, that's when Ferris realises that Guide is Vitor, and that's when Vitor says it's about time and removes her helmet, and the helmet's pitched her voice deeper, and she describes as... I'll just read how she's described. She was scorned, her cheeks hollowed. Her forehead marking was still there, but it was faint now, a faded tattoo. She had shaved her dark hair, but her blue eyes were still piercing. And she holds up a hand to everyone and tells them that they're not for them, and asks for them to disperse. But one man stays close, and she says to him, Donald, can you get Ferris's companions some food? They've been walking most of the night. And that's when I assume Donald is her bodyguard, as he's prepared in case a attack is made by Ferris and the others. And Vitor explains to them that no one will hurt them now, and the arrays move off a bit, but Trevor stays by Ferris's side, and as it says, Trevor stayed stubbornly by Ferris's side. Vitor looks at Trevor and just goes, your apprentice? I wouldn't say that, Ferris said. Me either, Trevor said. Ferris says that they've been looking for her, and she holds up her hands and says, don't use that name, I've left it behind. I'm Solace now. And she says, you left the Jedi. Some sort of spat between Padawans, I heard. As Ferris referred to as Vitor. And Ferris just says, hardly a spat. And because of the amount of heartache and guilt it gave him. And Solace, asks where he got the lightsaber, and he explains that it was from Garamulin, and he goes on and he challenges her a bit and says, the one you said you'd return for, and she says, I tried, and Ferris just goes, so you say. And Ferris, and they're a bit like adversaries, and Ferris doesn't quite know how it happened, and he wasn't going to back down, but he could also tell that Solace was waiting, and either she still thought of him as a Padawan, or that she was used to people obeying her. And with the settlers here, and to Ferris that was quite clear in the way she gave orders and the way she expected them to move when she told them to. And Solace just says, we're off to a good start. And she guides Olin and Trevor to her office. And we get to see a bit of Ferris's thoughts. And also we get to see that Trevor and Ferris don't quite trust Solace at the moment. And this isn't quite the reunion that Ferris was expecting. He was expecting a kind of heartfelt and emotional reunion with Vitor, but instead this wasn't even close. And he expected it to be filled with relief and emotion and the core understanding between Jedi, but this wasn't close to that at all, and that Solace was just unreasonable to him, and that she seemed to have no wish to connect Jedi to Jedi, and instead she'd just taken every opportunity to remind him that he wasn't a Jedi. And Ferris just gets straight to the point and says, I know of another Jedi who is alive besides Garen, and we learn that although Obi-Wan had given him permission to reveal he still survived to other Jedi, Ferris doesn't quite trust Solace yet. He wanted to figure out why she was so unsympathetic, and how she didn't seem to be fazed in the slightest by letting them be, by letting her settlers steal from people that she leads there. She just doesn't seem fazed by it, and I'll just read it out. First elected to wait with details until he has a better grasp of what Solace was like. He was still bothered by the fact that she had led them there, that she had led them here, and then turned her back indifferently to their fate. Whatever had happened to her had pushed her very far from the Jedi path. And Ferris just tells him that the Jedi, which of course he doesn't say is Obi-Wan yet, he says that the Jedi is in exile, and that Garen and him have established a secret base for any Jedi where they can gather and become stronger. And Solace just takes this in and goes, You're serious? You're going to travel the galaxy picking up stray Jedi who may not even exist and bring them to some camp? And she gives a bark of a laugh and goes, Count me out! And Ferris just tries to say that if they stay together they'll be stronger when the time comes to fight. And Solace just shakes her head and goes, and just says that the galaxy's controlled by the Sith and they've killed all the Jedi, and that Ferris's plan is doomed and she wants no part of it, and says that she's got everything she needs here. And Ferris tries to get a reaction from her and goes, Beings who worship you, yes, I can see you have all the attention and service you could want. And Solace doesn't take the bait, and she just says, what's wrong with that? I've taken those who the Empire would have squashed like slugs and given them a safe place to live. What makes you think your plan is so much better than mine? Ferris says that they were destroyed, and even the younglings were slaughtered, and what makes us so unsympathetic to that? And Solace looks down through the gratings to the ocean below and just says that those were the black days, and she doesn't choose to revisit them. Ferris says that they can someday rise against the Empire, and he believes that they can do that with his whole heart, and that if he can help in any way, even protect just one Jedi, then he will gladly do that. He will pledge himself to do that. And Solace says that, okay, may the Force be with you then, but she's not going anywhere. She's happy where she is. She goes on the occasional bounty hunting job to finance the area, the unbeat place, and it's filled with people she trusts, and the Empire doesn't even know where to find her, and they don't even know that she's alive. And look, if you remember, back in I think it was chapter 6, where we get the conversation between Malorum and Vader. Back in that chapter, there was a mention of Malorum having a spy in the Jedi group, and I completely misjudged the conversation, because Vader also mentions that there is a Jedi on Coruscant, and that's the group that Malorum says that he's got a spy in. I thought they were talking about Ferris, but no, he was talking about Phytor. So I've been completely confused the whole time when they've been saying Phytor, oh, he knows about Phytor, and it was, But no, he was actually talking about Phytor, and that's when Ferris tells Solace that they do know of her existence, and that they overheard the head Inquisitor Malorum, and head isn't capitalised, so that brings up all other manner of questions to the head Inquisitor going on with Malorum and Hydra. But anyway, he says that he overheard their conversation, and that Vader knows he's alive, but he doesn't seem to care much, and that he's a Sith. And Solace goes that there were always two, but she didn't know who they were, but says of course it makes sense. And Ferris says that Malorum knows that she's alive too, and that he's planning to take back the sub-levels of Coruscant and go all the way down to the crust, and that's why the Erased came down here for a place of safety. And also says that Malorum mentioned that they had a spy with Vitor's group, and Solace doesn't believe it. And Ferris says that he doesn't, and Ferris says that he doesn't even know if it's true, but he's only telling her what he heard. And theorises that he could have just been saying it to impress Vader, because again, Malorum does like making himself higher than others. And that's when Ferris says, but can you afford to take that chance? Can you take that chance? And Solace doesn't answer, and Ferris leans in and says they've kept the lightsabers, and that's when that grabs Solace's attention, and he says that there were hundreds of them, maybe more, from the Jedi that they killed, and Solace clasps her hands and leans forwards, resting her forehead against them, and Ferris goes on and says they're lying in one of the storage rooms and gathering dust, and that's when Solace finally asks what she wants from him. What he wants from her, and Ferris just goes, I'm only here to find a Jedi. And Solace takes a breath and says that they need to go back to the temple, and Ferris is completely taken off guard, and as she wasn't expected to say that, and just goes, what? And Solace immediately starts planning, and she says, we'll get inside, find out what they're planning for the settlers and for the Erased. And Ferris goes, I don't think we can, the security has been tightened. And Solace plans that they're going to steal the lightsabers, and in case any more Jedi are alive, they can have a lightsaber for an individual, for multiple individuals, to make a whole army. And in any case, Ferris can hide them, and she says that the lightsabers shouldn't lie with the Sith, and that it's a desecration. Ferris gets interrupted when he tries to say that he agrees, and Solace says that she'll discover who the spy is if there is one, and says, no, there's too much at stake, and they can leave immediately. And that's when Ferris says if it wouldn't just make more sense to escape Coruscant, and that even if she doesn't want to come with him to the asteroid, the galaxy's big and they can find some place to hide. And Solace just said that she's tired of running, and that they've driven her here, and here is where she will stay. Ferris says that they just left the temple a few days ago, and he doesn't think it's possible to get in and out now. Or let alone navigate once they're inside, as they'll be on full alert. And Trevor says, double, full, extra alert. And Solace asks how they get in. And Ferris sees that Solace has just already made up her mind, and he explains how he got in through the towers and then down the service tunnels to the main building. And Solace just goes, the hard way, and Ferris goes, I didn't say it was easy. And she just goes, why didn't you take the supply turbo lift shaft along the southeast wall? There is no supply turbo lift shaft on that side. Of course, you don't know about it. It was built during the Clone Wars. And she goes on to explain that there were so many pilots and there was so much more gear to move back and forth to the hangar. And so it was built during the Clone Wars to to bring supplies from the storage room to the living quarters. It goes up vertically and then horizontally. And she brings out schematics and shows Ferris, and she asks where Malorum was, and she also asks if the living quarters are damaged. And Ferris goes, no, being destroyed, sorry, and Ferris goes, no, it's been damaged, but it's still intact. Much of it is, at least. And that's when Solace brings out the schematics and shows him the path. And she says, and she also explains that it connects to the turbo lift shaft in the spire. And Ferris tells her that the spire's damaged, and she says she knows, but it doesn't matter. And they probably don't use the turbo lift, as there's no reason to, because it mainly served the living quarters and the hangar. And that's when she asks where Malorum is, and that's when Ferris says that he's taken up base in Yoda's quarters. And Soros goes saying his office is here, only a short distance from the shaft. And that's when Ferris feels his blood quicken, and he can't shake and wonders if it's possible, and he shakes his head and even says that even if they could use a new turbo lift, how would they even get in? And that's when Soros explains that unlike most buildings at that level, the temple was built on poles that ran all the way down to the crust, and that she found them, and they can get in through there. And Ferris just goes through the floor, and Trevor just says they'll have to blast in, and even if they do, they're going to draw attention. And that's when Soros tells them that no, she has a different way, and she brings them over to a odd piece of machinery that she built herself, and explain that it can burrow through solid rock, and that she did have to take out the laser cannons and shields, but it's fast, and it can get through the base of the temple, and promises that. And Ferris asks why she built it in the first place. She explained that she lives under the crust and she needs an exit strategy in case of the worst. And she knows she's going and asks if they might go. And Ferris looks at Trevor and considers for the moment, and he thinks that this might just be the only chance to get in the temple, the only chance to fulfill his promise to Obi-Wan and retrieve the lightsabers, and that he could figure out a way to stop him. And that's when he thinks that this might be his only chance, and he says he's in. Hold on a moment. Right then, I'm back. So I did predict that Solos would be a person, you know. I said that in the very first chapter is mentioned. I think it was chapter 9, chapter 8. It was mentioned. Solos was first mentioned. I predicted it in that, you know. If you won't go back and watch my review on, I think, chapter 8, 9, 10, you know, you would have seen me literally predict it in that chapter. But I didn't expect Solos to be Fight or Rana. That did not hit me until it happened. I do quite like that Fight, or who I've just referred to as Solos because that's how she wants to be called. But I may use it interchangeably. I do like that Fight or Solos isn't the typical Jedi. I like that she's a bit different, how she's disconnected herself from the Jedi, and how she's nothing really like a Jedi now. And it does make you wonder, did she purposely abandon Garen? Because maybe Garen reminded her too much of the past. As she says, the past are black days that she doesn't want to remember. And I think that could have been quite a big reason. It will be interesting to see if we learn why. I don't know if we will, but it will be interesting to see if we do learn why. Again, I like that she pretty much is a bit smug and a little bit arrogant, a bit self-centered, and kind of a bit self-caring, not really, a bit selfish. I like that, because again, I like that she isn't much like the ordinary Jedi, but she still has that respect for the things sacred to the Jedi. As soon as she hears about the lightsabers, she's right in on that action. And of course, when she hears, and also she wants to figure out who that spy is. And I think that is an interesting kind of twist on her character, because initially you wouldn't expect her to be like that, but she is, and I think that's quite interesting. Also, I didn't expect Guide to wind up being Solace, but anyway, again, I do quite like Solace's character. I think it's an interesting twist and an unexpected twist, and I do like how The Last of the Jedi does have those twists and turns. They are a little bit predictable. I will say that they can be a bit predictable, but it's not bad predictable. It's done in a way that makes it keeps things fresh. You know, we've already had the 11. We've already had the Erased. You know, I think if Solace was just another place, it would have just been a bit repetitive at that point. But no, Solace was a person. It kept things fresh and tried to subvert your expectations. You know, Solace. We've had Gavin Newland, we've had Ferris Olin, we've had Obi-Wan Kenobi, who are, for the most part, quite Jedi-like. Even Ferris, who doesn't really claim to be a Jedi, he still holds true to be, he's always trying to be like a Jedi. And even though he's not always like a Jedi, he's trying to be. And then you have Solace, who is nothing like a Jedi at all, even though she was once a Jedi. And I just think that Solace is quite a good twist on the things that you came to expect from what's been established in the first two books. So yeah, most of what I really have to say is about Solace, and I've already said it. Again, it was an interesting twist that Solace wasn't as much of a safe haven as you expected it to be. It wasn't all sunflowers and roses. You know, it was... even though, you know, the Erased were a bit like that, the Solace just comes more... I'm just going to refer to Solace now as a bit more of a collective term, hopefully, and if I need to refer to Fighter, I'll refer to her by Fighter, hopefully, if I remember to, but just for the rest of this review. But I do like how the people of Solace, that's what I'll call them collectively, and if I just say Solace, I just mean Fighter also. The people of Solace, I do like how they come across as a bit more aggressive than the Erased. You know, the Erased, they did come across as a bit uninviting initially, but then you had Dexter Jettster, who is a familiar character, he's quite a charming character, and kind of broke that whole conflict up before it really started. You know, it did kind of start, but didn't really get to any extreme points. But then with Solace, it doesn't feel quite as inviting. It doesn't feel quite as uninviting. I mean, it feels a bit more unwelcoming, and that you're not you can't be there, if that makes sense, compared to the Erased, where it was very quickly became quite a place of belonging. There's just something off about the people and the place of Solace, and I think it's quite interesting how Jude Watson pulled off that mood, and I have a feeling it's probably due to where she set it in, and also how she put the cliffhanger. You know, when we were introduced to the Erased, the cliffhanger was Dexter Jettster, you know, and it was calling for everyone to stop. You know, the cliffhanger for chapter, 12, that didn't end with Ferris pulling out his lightsaber and Guide revealing herself to be Fighter. You know, it ended on them thinking, oh, we're about to be attacked. And they were about to be attacked, but I think the way it was done, it just adds a thing about just as a thing about the place and area of Solace that just doesn't quite feel like just doesn't quite feel as welcoming as the Erased. And I think it's interesting how Jude Watson's done that. Not really, I don't really have to... I also do kind of like how Vitor, which again I'll just refer to as Solace, I do quite like how Solace as is a bit, oh, of course you don't know, and goes on to explain the main turbo lifts. It just feels really... It just kind of further solidifies that kind of smugness on her part. And it's just a bit, oh, of course, you're like this. She's going, oh, of course you don't know. And it was quite, again, it's a bit humorous. But yeah, I'm going to be interested to see, this is moving a lot faster than I was expecting it to. I knew it was going to move fast, but I wasn't expecting it to move this fast. But yeah, we've only got 4 more chapters left, I think. Because this is chapter 13, we got to there's only 17 chapters, and there's less than 30 pages left. I think it was something like page 111 or 112 that this chapter ended on, and it's 137 pages, so, we've not got a lot of pages left. When I know the last chapter's 3 pages long as well, so... But yeah, that is my review for chapter 13. Again, I don't really have a whole lot to say on it because it is a lot of talking, a lot of mainly just learning what Solace is like, because I'm fairly sure this is the first appearance of Vitor in Star Wars. She's been mentioned before. She was mentioned in Dark Warrior, and I'm fairly I did look at her page. She is mentioned in Jedi Quest, apparently, or this was her first proper appearance, and I think it's quite interesting how she is very different to how you would expect a Jedi to be. But yeah, and again, this chapter mainly just establishing what Vitor is like, and then once we kind of established what she's like, we can't just move straight into getting to the temple, and so there isn't and also there is the reveal of course. But yeah, that's I don't really have a whole lot to say outside of that. But yeah, I'll be looking forward to the next chapters. So yeah, thank you all for watching, and goodbye.